Our chief guest today pursued his early education in Mavelikara, Kerala, and graduated from Bishop Moore College, Mavelikara. He completed his post-graduation in English from St. Stephen's College, New Delhi, and served his alma mater as a teacher for more than 4 decades from 1973 to 2016. He has served as a member of Delhi Minority Commission for 2 terms and has been the member of the National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions from 2004 to 2017. He also has been the member of the National Integration Council for 2 terms. He has served as the principal of St. Stephen's College for almost a decade. He has authored 15 books, over 700 articles, and 120 booklets. The title of his latest book is On a Stormy Course, a book on his tempestuous period as the principal of Stephen's College. Currently, he is living a life of disciplined student, doing what he enjoys most, reading and writing. Attitude matters. I invented the luxury of inventing excuses, says our chief guest, who combines wide-ranging experiences in higher education, social action, multi-faith initiatives, media, preaching, research and writing, and has been engaged in mainstreaming the secular presence in India. Leaving the certainties of a coveted job, he plunged into public life a few years ago, and in a short span of time, he has made a tremendous impact on the society. In a recent article on the national newspaper, he speaks of insulating the judiciary from extraneous pressures. He differentiates between politics and adjudication of justice. Almost every political philosopher since Plato assumed that the practice of politics will never be hamstrung by truth. The exact opposite is the case with justice. Truth is its essence. His advice to the youth is, I am saying as if he is speaking, engage fully, stand your ground, be true to yourself, keep on smiling. With this, not a very exhaustive profile, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Reverend Dr. Valson Thampu.
The faculty and students of this wonderful institution, members of the public, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first time I'm visiting your wonderful college. And it is to me something of a discovery because in St. Stephen's College, we are silently trained to be arrogant. It's almost a sacred duty in that institution to assume that all others are inferior. So it's important for a person like me who has been nurtured and denatured in a context such as this, to travel around and discover for myself, if only to cultivate a little more of humility. Institutions like St. Aloysius, where wonderful work is quietly in progress. Our 2 institutions share much in common. You are older than me by 1 year. Aloysius was founded in 1880, St. Stephen's in 1881. So 1 year senior. Both are institutions with a spiritual foundation, but both have taken completely different routes. When I think of St. Stephen's College, of course I'm proud to be its alumnus, but I feel sad that the college did not address the duty to train young men and women to serve this country as its intelligentsia. The public identity of St. Stephen's College is rooted largely in the large number of bureaucrats, affectionately referred to as babus, in this country. There was a time when this tiny college used to churn out at least 25% of the IAS, IFS trainees, which is quite a disproportionate share of our presence in bureaucracy. By the way, bureaucracy is not a wonderful thing. Its best definition comes from Hannah Arendt, who calls it government by nobody. Because it's a marvelous mechanism meant to bypass accountability. Nobody knows who does what, but you suffer, but you do not know what has hit you, from where and when. All right. So, because of my background in St. Stephen's College, and particularly because of my awareness of what the college failed to do, I think of subjects like this. When you take a bird's eye view of history, the evolution of our species, you will find two contrary forces at work all the time. One is the need to belong together and to create participatively a shared context which is conducive to the development and fulfillment of every human being, which actually, it might surprise you to know, is the essence of politics. I'm sure you have a wonderful department of political science, and your faculty members will agree with me when I say that the word politics actually means the art of living together in a city. It's derived from the word polis, which is city. Politics is put in the plural form because it embraces the many factors and facets that must coexist harmoniously in order to ensure that a condition conducive to the maximum development and self-expression of all members of a society are obtained under the overall title politics. So there is this fundamental human need which Immanuel Kant talks about in his several principles of universal history, that we need to live together. We need to belong together. And belonging together always implies the process of conformity. If you want to be together, and this insight also has existed from the very dawn of human consciousness, if you want to be together, you have to compromise something of your personal freedom, your likes and dislikes, your whims and fancies, your instincts and your impulses. You have to conform. That's one part of the issue. The other issue is what we are directly concerned with. At least from Plato down, we have this awareness that there is a very special duty attached to those who have the privilege in a society and those who have this privilege are very few, to be trained intellectually, which is what education should mean. Whether or not that happens is a different issue. The duty to be a thinker, to develop, as it were, a life of the mind. Okay? It's a very simple expression. A life of the mind. And the tendency to live entirely in the world out there has been an important pull on the human mind or human nature. To escape from the life of the mind and to be lost in a system, a structure, for which we earlier used the word belong. Sometimes, depending on the context, and this is the paradox of the human predicament, to belong is to be lost. You understand what I mean? To belong is to be lost. And that is why it becomes extremely important for us to be conscious of the dynamics of belonging. How to belong is an issue. I'm sure it's an issue in Advaita philosophy. You need to belong and be separated. Because that is an important aspect of living in the world, as against living in nature. If 4 people are sitting around a table, they are both united and separated by the table. You understand? You are in the same moment united and separated. Now, if you remove the table from among them, the situation changes very dramatically. In fact, you could cause disorientation by a simple act of lifting the table out of that space. So, from time immemorial, this realization has also developed on parallel lines that even as we belong, we also need to be outsiders. Okay? I'm introducing an important concept now. There is a sacred duty, a painful duty, a challenging responsibility to serve as outsiders. Sometimes, perhaps more often than not, the best service you can do to a society, to a system, to a religion, to a movement, is to be an outsider to that movement. This has to be very clearly registered. But when you do that, of course, you could be immediately identified as a troublemaker, a nuisance, an inconvenience. Because it's somewhat like this. We are all very fond of automobiles these days. You know, like it was in the United States, say nearly 78 years ago. You are defined by your motor car. In fact, there was a time when in America, young men were more deeply and passionately in love with their automobiles than with their girlfriends. Because mobility was the cult. Mobility became synonymous with freedom, and the quintessence of America is freedom. And America, which was founded on freedom, had slave trade. So much so, when Charles Dickens visited the United States, he shocked. He was already a cult figure before he reached the United States. People were greatly excited to meet with Charles Dickens. But on the very first occasion of his public reception, he shocked everyone by saying, I know that Americans are in such deep love with freedom that you buy and sell it in the market. You understand? That's the problem. So, this passion, which is simply derived from belonging to a particular context. It is nothing innate. It is nothing that you have discovered for yourself. It is something that you simply imbibe by virtue of belonging to a particular system, particular culture, and a particular period in time. I want all of us to know that if we were living, say, 50 years ago, if we were seeing different, suppose we had televisions in those days, different spectacles on televisions, if we were reading different books, we were eating a different kind of food, if we were wearing different kinds of clothes, we would have advocated different things. Things that we today consider to be our own are really not our own. We are, as the controversial British writer Oscar Wilde, a prominent figure in the arts for art's sake movement, said, we are other people. We are other people. Why? Because our ideas are borrowed, our sentiments are borrowed, our dreams are borrowed. Everything is on loan. And yet, we strike up such a posture of independence. And a very posture of independence is borrowed. Therefore, it is a gesture of slavery. The first thing you have to do in order to be a free thinker is to give up your freedom. Because you are free only to think as free thinkers do, which means you are an intellectual slave. You follow me? These are some of the conundrums that as young people you need to be aware of. I have not come here to give you a high-profile lecture on this theme at all. Today, my greatest happiness is that I have become a farmer. I have returned to nature. 2 hours every day, I work as a farmer in the small little patch of land that I have. And I know what it means. It's profound liberation. But that's not my subject. So, I was so far trying to give you an idea of the extent to which all of us conform to the spirit of the age in which we happen to live. It's highly arbitrary. It's a matter of chance. It is randomly that we belong to this particular age, and therefore it is randomly that we assume certain positions, adopt certain attitudes to life, and promulgate certain positions in life. We need to develop a perspective on these things, lest we end up as slaves and fools of time. I've been in this field now nearly half a century. I have seen too many young people ending up fooled, inwardly hollowed out, becoming, to use the words of T.S. Eliot, stuffed men, hollow men. Nothing inside. That should not be so with you young people. You need to be committed to the authenticity of your life, which is my cry for you. Because I know what is happening. And it is far too sad for words. So what I'm going to offer to you are some reflections, not to make you cutting-edge thinkers, but to make you a little more responsible for your own life. And to look at things differently. Okay? All right, now let's go. So I've so far talked about the terrible, powerful pull, compulsion to conform to things. And perhaps that's how much of life is lived. But to some in a society are given a sacred responsibility to stand apart, It's a painful, sacred, critical responsibility. And these categories have been more or less clear over the years, over the centuries. For example, going back to Athens of the 4th, 5th century BC, this was the primary discipline of the philosopher. So the idea in Athens, particularly Athens, that a philosopher should not participate in politics. In fact, a philosopher should not even be involved in other forms of labor. And it took a long while for people to realize that the reason why Plato prescribed this non-participation or non-involvement in the physical, material, and organized forms of life on the part of the philosopher is that the philosopher needs a little distance to think freely. If you belong too closely to anything, anyone, you're not in a position to be objective about your friend, are you? You cannot, because he or she is your friend. You need a little distance. So it is from this time onwards that this awareness slowly develops. That is an important contribution to social dynamics, social wholeness, to stand aside and to observe the ongoings in a social structure, in a society, in a body politic, in a city, in a country, and to serve as its, shall I say, perspective of truth. So this is actually the discipline of being the intelligentsia. Now, there's a difference between intelligentsia and intelligence. You can be an intellectual without being part of the intelligentsia. By the way, the word intelligentsia is of Russian origin. And the Russian context, because of its very strong Russian Orthodox tradition, which explains the great creative genius of writers like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, etc., the profound depth in Russian literature. It's something unique, it's incomparable actually. And I cannot understand it except with reference to the spiritual depth that nurtured these great creative geniuses. So in the Russian context, the distinctive feature of the intelligentsia was not intelligence. Of course, intelligence is necessary. I don't want to belittle it. The Russians did not want to belittle it. But that was not adequate in itself. While it was necessary, it was not sufficient. The most distinctive feature of the intelligentsia was, is, and must forever will be, quote unquote, moral passion. And something very important, moral passion. Now, my own conviction, based on my experiences, my own self-analysis, is that you really cannot have a moral passion if you don't develop intellectually. Unfortunately, in many traditions, especially in religious traditions, other than the Jesuit tradition, with which I am somewhat familiar, there is this very unhelpful assumption of a dichotomy between religion and reason, between faith and rationality, common sense. To me, the highest levels of intellectual development merge into the spiritual zone, spiritual realm. The only difference is this: while the intellectuals of the world try to make others feel that they are great, the intelligentsia of the world would want to make you feel that you also can be great. You understand? Okay? While the intellectuals of the world want to impress you, the intelligentsia of the world want to inspire you. Now you look around in this country of 1.3 billion people, name one person of this category. Everybody wants to impress you, right? Everything in this country is a one-way traffic. From the Prime Minister down. I'm not saying that he's an exception to the general pattern. He does it more effectively, that's all. All of us, given the opportunity, will behave exactly in the same fashion. As Immanuel Kant says, he says the olden culture, the Greco-Roman culture, was based on rhetoric and the art of persuasion. Therefore, you have debate, you have dialogue, like Platonic dialogue, for example, where different points of view are made to come together, interact among themselves, so that something of the truth can emerge. Dialogue. The age in which you are living and the country in which you are living is totally inhospitable to dialogues. So, dialogue and rhetoric, by the way, rhetoric is the art of persuading others, appealing to their rational faculties. You must understand these things very clearly. What is rhetoric? Rhetoric was an important and necessary ingredient in the education of the gentleman right up to the 20th century. Then it got lost sight of. Then rhetoric gave way to oratory. I'll come to that in a while. Rhetoric was a distinctive feature of the educated mind because such a mind is committed to persuading others, not with falsehood, not with violence, not with authority, which is used as a sledgehammer to silence opposition, which is all happening, but through a reasoned appeal to the goodness of the other person, the common sense of the other person, which meant that you took the other seriously. But from there you see a sudden shift from rhetoric to oratory, to eloquence. Now, go back to Athens for a minute. Look at Homer, for example. Look at Aristotle, look at Plato. They all work within an idea that, and this is something that young people must register very, very carefully, the most important right, the most important that a human being must have is, please remember this, is to live significantly. Can you register that much? Every human being must have the right to live significantly. Now, then they break it down to two parts. What does it mean? What does it take to live significantly? Now, all of us want to live significantly, isn't it? If you read the 4 wishes of the American psychologist Thompson, it's called the 4 wishes of Thompson. And one of the 4 fundamental drives of the human mind is to be effective. To be effective. Who there is in our midst who doesn't want to be effective? Many people, of course, fail to be effective. There are reasons for it. But there is none here who doesn't want to be effective. Very often, even though we want to be effective, we do not even bother to find out how to be effective. By the way, please give me a little signal at 55th minute, because I lose sense of time. So the Greeks broke it down to 2 parts. To live significantly is to speak effectively and to act significantly. So two things, very easy to remember these things. Speech and action. Right? Speech and action. And this is why all through the European tradition, which actually has its roots in Athens, then it migrates to Rome, and then it spreads. There's a great emphasis on the art of speaking that's called rhetoric. And in fact, the extent to which people used to go in order to cultivate the art of rhetoric is actually amazing. And then to act significantly. And you must understand that the right to do so, right to speak and act significantly, was confined only to citizens. Citizens meant those who could participate in the life of the city, which therefore excluded women, children, slaves. They were the absolute majority. In a city like Athens, at that time, there were only about 30,000 citizens. Only they had the right to speak significantly, act significantly, right to be heard. Even today, you will see in your society that some people have no right to be heard. Some people have no right to act in public. And some people claim the monopoly to dominate the public scene. You sit and listen to me. You should know where it originated. Therefore, now I'm coming to this point. In such a context, there arises the need for a small group of people to arise and serve as the voice in the wilderness. To borrow words from a South African theologian, to speak truth to the center of power. Now, as I pointed out in my article, which was referred to here, when you review the evolution of politics over the centuries, you find a progressive distancing from the duty to tell the truth. In fact, Machiavelli is the most significant figure or turning point in this development. So much so today, politics is done more on the basis of propaganda. And those of you who have read Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, which means My Struggles, will remember that chapter, a whole chapter, in which he discusses the dynamics of propaganda. Where he says propaganda is the art of convincing people that black is white and white is black. And fascist governments throughout the world have banked heavily on propaganda, which is the art of misleading an entire people, making them believe what is not. The great poet Horace said, what is truth? His beautiful, simple definition is, truth is telling as it is. You understand? Telling as it is. What is propaganda? Telling as it is not. Exactly the opposite. Now, all this is happening in your society. Do you hear a single voice crying against it? Anyone? The tragedy of your country, the tragedy of my country, is the disappearance of the intelligentsia. And I want to place before you today that this demise, this extinction of the intelligentsia stems from a collapse of education. There's a direct connection between the two. And therefore, those of us who are in education must wake up, at least at this 11th hour, and realize that our most fundamental need, or fundamental responsibility in education is not to train people for the market, but it is to train the intelligentsia for this country. Therefore, education has to be practiced very differently from what we are doing today. Unfortunately, all these mechanisms of regulation, the regulatory authorities, all these instruments of regulation are pushing institutions more and more and more and more into the molds of conformity so that they simply do what is most expedient for the existing political dispensation. You see, there are two ways in which the political dispensation annexes the academia. By the way, in every society, every age, for as long as education was practiced in an organized sense, as against private education, a history of, shall we say, about 800 years, the state has always had a real and sinister interest in education. Why? Because education is the best and the most powerful instrument available to a political structure to bring about homogenization in a nation, in a society. You understand? Homogenization, making everybody like everybody else. So if you want a generation to parrot what you think is right, infiltrate education. You go back to Germany in the 30s of the last century, you see the extent to which academia was penetrated by the Nazi ideologues. Naked attempts were made to infiltrate centers of learning and to use them as propaganda warehouses in order to brainwash young minds. Because that's the most effective strategy available to a fascist government to do this. And right there you see a wonderful character called Martin Heidegger, who was appointed as rector of the University of Freiburg in 1933. He's a great philosopher. I have admiration for his philosophical insights, though I'm very troubled by his political career. He was chosen to be the rector because he had shown some leanings or affiliation, intellectual affinity to the Nazi ideology. But then he did not last long. Within a year, he resigns, in another story. What I'm saying is that today, for example, I can assure you that in an overwhelming majority of cases, vice chancellors are chosen for universities based entirely on party affiliation. In fact, it is a demerit to be an intellectual or a member of intelligentsia to be a vice chancellor. You can rest assured that if you are independent in your thinking, you will never become a vice chancellor, even if you are the best in the field. That's where we are today. But in such a context, I want to plead with all of you that we have a sacred responsibility to constitute that small rump of the society, which is designated as the intelligentsia. And to go back to the earlier word I introduced, to be the outsider to a system. Now I'm introducing another bit of thought. Be an outsider to the system for the sake of the system. You understand what I'm saying? That is where the intelligentsia are different from rebels. A rebel is one who says, no, I won't have it. A member of the intelligentsia would say, I love you, but you're wrong. And that is the role that is now conspicuously absent in our society. And I tell you that if you are interested in your own authenticity of existence, you see, from existential philosophy, we know these differences: authentic life, inauthentic life, right? Read Jean-Paul Sartre, through Albert Camus, and from Malraux, or going back to, say, Soren Kierkegaard, to the Russian side, Dostoevsky, etc. The existential, whether it is deistic existentialism or otherwise, this idea of leading an authentic or inauthentic existence. I think it's a fundamental duty that we have, that we should be true to ourselves. Rather than allow us to be sucked into a system for whatever immediate benefits there seem to be available, all these benefits are destructive and destructive of the core of your own personality. So therefore, we have certain categories of people in society, or certain pockets in society where the intelligentsia used to be located. Right? First was academia. Second was judiciary. And that's why I wrote that piece. Today I have apprehensions that this particular aura of the judiciary is about to dissipate. I will not go into specifics because these days contempt of court is very common. Contempt jurisdiction is very, very widely misunderstood in this country. It's high time we have a very serious look at contempt jurisdiction, but a subject in itself. I mean, if you have the judiciary functioning in a democracy, which the will of the people are sovereign and supreme, how can any institution in the country, whether it is the judiciary, the executive, the parliament, be above criticism? It's anathema to the fundamentals of democracy, yet these things do happen. Okay, now the other was the media. The media used to play a very important role in functioning as the outsider to the system. What has happened now is that the media has become one with the system. The media has become a paid servant of the system. This was inevitable because the corporate houses bought up all the media channels and also the print media. It was done deliberately. In fact, when you study fascist forms of government, you find that the heart of fascism is the congruence of the state and the corporate sector. You understand? The state and the corporate sector become one. That's the heart of fascism. And once that happens, because of money power, media collapses. I know it in my own flesh and blood. There was a time when none of my articles used to be turned down by any newspaper in this country. Today, barring one newspaper, every newspaper says, please don't send anything to us. Only one newspaper remains, and that also will close very soon. And I'm fine, because when I could do it, I have done it. There's no regret. But these are indicators as to where we are headed. And the more these things happen, the more it becomes an exciting duty to stand out there and say that this is not what it should be, because I love you. Okay? Now, since my title is Intelligentsia and Society, let me just say a couple of things about society. I say this because the practice of education over a period of time committed another mistake. And that mistake was to drift progressively away from the society. So that today, unfortunately, the academia exists almost hermetically sealed off from social realities. Every institution exists within a social matrix. Life is impossible without the society. Now, education, your education is subsidized by the government. You know, the government doesn't produce 1 rupee. It's the taxpayers' money. So the man out there is actually educating you. A man who is much less educated than you are, who did not have the privilege of entering the portals of St. Aloysius, is educating you in St. Aloysius. So, one of the things I learned soon after coming here is Father Principal telling me, and that was music to my ears. He told me that St. Aloysius organizes public lectures. And I understand that this is one such. That's a fantastic thing to do. You know why? You know why? The mark of a living body, a living organism, is its sensitivity to surroundings. A dead body is incapable of it. You have to do everything to the dead body. The dead body cannot do anything to you. Most institutions in this country are living in that moribund state. I introduced a concept during my tenure as principal of St. Stephen's. And that's what I call institutional social responsibility, on the analogy of corporate social responsibility. Unfortunately, today we have imbibed this idea that money is all that matters. We look up to the corporates because they have a lot of money. That's your blood money. All right? It's a money of exploitation. Let that be. And 2% of their ill-gotten wealth they will donate to social responsibility, and they all become saints. I consider it an insult to me to accept that money. My message to the country is, look, I have something to give to you. If my institution is alive, something will flow out of my college and enrich the world around. I offered a course to the citizens of India, Delhi. It's called Citizenship and Cultural Enrichment. Overnight, I had 320 registrations. I said there is an age limitation to be a student. You have to be between 18 and 80, only in that range. And I had students 18 years old and 80 years old, no exaggeration. I taught them for a whole year. And CNN and IBN became my media partner. They used to come and videograph every lecture and put it on their website. And those lectures were seen all over the world. It arose out of my conviction that out of an institution, a river of life must flow and enrich the world around. And I'm glad to know that you are doing it. It's a revolutionary thing to do. And that is how, Father, you can train. Make the students participate in this. Assume responsibility for this. Why are we doing what we are doing? It's important for us to become a source of social regeneration. We can do it. You know, my friends, one thing is very clear, and I believe with Aristotle, that human beings are fundamentally good. There's not a single human being who is in the core of his or her being wicked or perverted or gnarled. Everybody is potentially good. But people get distorted because of the influences of diverse kinds that they come under. And the mark of a good institution is to serve continually as a source of positive, humane, and redemptive influence, regenerative influence on the society around. A good institution must kindle life, spread light all around. And a whole society must become sane and clean because of an institution. You know, politicians will know cleanliness in a certain fashion. Swachha Bharat Abhiyan. When I became a farmer, I understood what Swachhata is. You know who keeps this country clean? Not politicians, but farmers. The first thing I have to do when I sow the seed is to clean the land. And when the farmer cleans the land, his sweat falls on it, his heart is in it, his soul dances on it. No politician can understand it, my friends. They know nothing about what they're talking. You learn these things because of experience. There is no textbook that will ever teach you. And these things happen to you because you move out into newer realms, zones, and sectors of experience. Emphasize the outward flow. Reach out. You know, in this country, we think that rivers are sacred, right? I believe rivers are holy. You know why? Because rivers are a continuous flow outwards. And where there is a body of water without an outward flow, it becomes a cesspool, becomes a source of corruption. That's what has happened in Indian politics. That's what has happened to Indian religions, all religions without exception, rotting at their roots. And in all of these sectors, the tragedy is that the voice of the intelligentsia is not heard.